Hi, this is Gabriel Owens, the Salty Seaman, geeking out about random things that I find interesting. And this is the State of the MMA World Address, early October 2014. So, big things coming out right now. Drug test failures. We've got latest casualty, Kung Lee, coming out of his fight in China, tested positive for human growth hormone. And everyone who saw him said, yeah, no shit. 40-year-old man all of a sudden has the body of a bodybuilder. Arnold in his prime would have been jealous. But the bigger story is he got caught, because HGH doesn't usually get caught. It's a substance that synthesizes in your bloodstream within a couple hours, so even blood tests don't really pick it up very easily. So either he shot up right before the fight, which doesn't make sense because it's not really going to help you, or the test got better. We don't know. He's contesting it, but yeah, he did it. There's no other way to say it. It's coming off the heels of a couple other, big drug test failures. Pretty much ending careers of 3 people, basically. It's just, these are all older. Kung Lee is, I think it's a chunk early. Sorry, Kung Lee said 40. He probably, I don't even know if he was going to fight after that. He'd been talking retirement forever. He initially just said he wanted to have a couple fights in UFC to say he did it. And he's done that now 3 times, I think, 3 or 4. Anyway, so yeah, he was probably going to retire anyway, but definitely probably now. But for that Chael Sonnen, pretty much ended his career. He announced retirement. Failed twice, well, 3 times technically. Failed after the first Anderson Silva fight. Failed for blood doping, I think, on an unannounced test. And then they retested him, and then he popped for steroids and also HGH. So, yeah, he announced his retirement. Cost him his job at Fox 2. Vanderlei Silva, didn't actually pop for a test, but he ran from a test, and they banned him for life. The Nevada State Athletic Commission does not fucking play. They put a message out to everybody: you run from a test, it'd be worse than actually failing it, which I think is very smart. Go Nevada. So, I think it brings the question, what's going to do with these guys' legacies? So all 3 of these guys are probably retiring. They all have different levels of infamy. Kung is really harder to gauge of all of them. He's more of a local guy. He's a San Jose hero. He had a bit of a run in UFC. He had a bit of national exposure, back in the Strikeforce days, Showtime and CBS and whatnot. But wasn't a huge MMA star to speak, but he was a name. They said he's a very big local name. And yeah, I don't know if history will look at him kindly or even remember him at all, really. Chael, he was a polarizing figure anyway. He was, regardless of how his career ended, it was going to be one of those things that was debated, and this really adds to it. But yeah, he's a guy you just love, you love the spectacle of him, you love him just being kind of full of shit, cutting all these, 70s era Billy Graham wrestling promos, made him, he's very happy to play a heel, and there's certain fans who just love that. There's some fans who just hated him for it, or people who knew what he was doing but still just thought he just didn't like it. There's pure sportist people who are fucking annoying. I don't like them.
On this fight, Joe Rogan, tonight is not for questions from me. This is your night, brother. I want to know how you feel being only inches away from greatness. I want you to tell everybody how it feels. Are you not mesmerized? Do you not have chills going up your spine for the first time on Fox for you to be here in Chael's Octagon on Chael's channel, holding Chael's microphone, interviewing?
But neither here nor there. But his best claim to fame is he's, before Chris Weidman, he was the guy that came closest to beating Anderson Silva, and he has a big mouth. And then he has this whole thing with John Jones and moved up in weight, yada yada yada. But anyway, but he was leading into a fight where he'd also been shit talking with Vanderlei Silva, who, out of all the 3, probably has the biggest pedigree. I think otherwise he'd definitely say, as soon as he retired, he'd go yeah, shoe in for the Hall of Fame, for any MMA Hall of Fame. Just for mostly his pride heyday, he was a huge name in Japan. He wasn't meant to be a hero there. He was designed as a monster heel. They were he was the guy that destroyed Sakuraba, and they thought, they kept bringing in all these other Japanese guys to beat him. Who's going to be the Japanese guy that beats Vanderlei? That was really the story of Pride for a long time. But the fans just ended up liking him anyway because he was just just a wonderful spectacle. You know, he looked the part, the ex-murderer. He had the glove roll. He's quite large. One of his last fights in Pride, it was an open weight fight with Crow Cop, and he weighed more than Crow Cop, who was a heavyweight, and he was a light heavyweight, or middleweight, as Pride called him. And then he came to UFC, and you know, the UFC fans embraced him too. You know, it wasn't just because he was a big Pride star. It was because he came in. You know, he had that awesome fight with Chuck, and then, you know, he brutalized Keith Jardine, and he had these wars with Brian Stan and Chris Lieben and all these people, and they knew he brought it. The fans loved, always ate him up, even though he was kind of on the downturn at that point. But you know, he was shrinking. He was, like I said, he was gigantic. Like if you watch the Pride 2006 Open Weight Grand Prix, he's gigantic. Like I said, he was like a couple pounds over Crow Cop, who was weight class above him normally. And UFC just started getting smaller and smaller, and eventually moved from light heavyweight down to middleweight, and he, you know, looked like someone poked a pin in him, and he deflated. So, but he never failed to test. But you know, he fought most of his career in Japan, where they didn't test for steroids or anything else. He never failed to test here, but then he ran as soon as they showed up at his door unannounced from his gym in Vegas. So, you know, he said he was on diuretics and went pop for that. Yeah, okay. But anyway, this is all coming out, and I think it's a good thing. It's, you know, if you're going to test, you have to be fucking serious about it. You can't just say we're testing the test and then it just becomes an IQ test, you know, which is what it is in fighting, because you know you're going to get tested before you fight, so you can cycle on and off. You know how steroids work. You know, it's like, okay, I can take this for this amount of time and I'll be clean by the time this test rolls around. And if you're not on the main card, the way it's been out, like unless you were the main event, you probably weren't getting the random out of competition test. But now it looks like they're really kind of cracking down on, hey, we're going to test. And the test on Kung Lee was done by UFC itself in China. That's why he's contesting it. It wasn't a WADA test. It wasn't an Athletic Commission test. It was done by the labs in China. He's saying they weren't, you know, certified, and they didn't keep their lab results, and he'd like to get it retested, but he can't now, yada yada yada. If you didn't look like that, I mean, maybe you'd have a case, but everyone just looks at you like, come on, dude, like, seriously. Another big fight, you know, it's been a bad year for big fights just falling through or getting delayed because of, well, it's the injury bug. Not really a bug, it's a combination of people still training really too hard, and now there's a lot of money on the table. People who used to fight injured, and everyone fights injured to a degree, but I think people fight more injured now than they used to. Or they don't fight they won't go into a big money fight with a major injury, and back in the day they would have, because it was a different game with a lot of money on the line. Now a lot of guys aren't willing to do that. John Jones doesn't play that old school game, but I think, and that's fine, you know, it's your livelihood, why risk it just to put on a show when you know there's a good chance you're going to lose because you're injured. I don't blame them, but I think a lot of it goes back to training methods. I think there has to be a sweeping change to how they train. You know, I mean, I don't think everyone's doing Chute box style, beating the shit out of each other, or Lions Den style quite like that anymore, but I think they are training too hard. They aren't, it's probably the fighters themselves pushing themselves, but at the same time, the guys that training them, the Greg Jacksons and whatnots of the world, need to come in and like really control the training more, because it's, you know, it's still costing you money in the long run, because you sit on the shelf with injuries, you're not earning money in a fight. So those guys need to get in there, control the training better. There's always going to be injuries, someone's going to get hurt, but I think there needs to be just the general way it's done in all of MMA needs to change. I mean, there's no other way to say it. But the reason this one I'm talking about is Nick Diaz and Anderson Silva. Is not due to injury, but due to Nick Diaz being Nick Diaz, which I love Nick Diaz. I think he's great. Just such a unique personality, and he always pulls something almost every fight, because he wouldn't be Nick Diaz if he didn't. This time it's DUI, a second one in a year. He's been charged with, he's contesting it, but yeah, he basically hasn't been seen since he lost to GSP. Sit out, wanted more money, He did Nick Diaz stuff. Anderson Silva's been on the shelf, of course, for a year almost because of that disgusting leg break he had in the rematch with Weidman. But, you know, it was an intriguing fight. Just, I mean, yeah, Diaz really is kind of a, you know, weight-wise, he could almost fight a lightweight. You know, he fought in Pride, I think, at 161. He could get down to that. He said he couldn't really get down to 155. But then he fought at 170, most time in the UFC and Strikeforce. And now he's moving up to 185 with Anderson, who's the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. And he's a 185er who cuts down from 200 something. So it was a big size difference, and it could be a difference. And that could play into striking, but I don't think it would be much of a grappling match. I think it would be the Stockton slap versus the best striker of MMA striker of all time. You know, can his boxing skills stand up to Anderson, and also is Anderson really recovered from having his leg shattered? You know, there's intriguing questions there, and if it did end up at a grappling match, you know, would Diaz try to take him down? Can he take him down? Neither one is a great wrestler, but Silva has shown a lot of wrestling defense, and Diaz really doesn't have any wrestling to speak of offensively. But once he's on the ground, of course, he has great jiu-jitsu. Silva does too. He's a black belt. Both are black belts. You know, I'm not getting into the argument of a real black belt versus, or someone has a better black belt than the other one. I'm a happy lifelong white belt here, but you know, general consensus is Diaz has like a real high-level black belt under Cesar Gracie. Silva has one under the Nogueira brothers, and he got it pretty quick. But you know, we saw he definitely has submission skills. Ask Travis Fuller, Dan Henderson, definitely ask Chael Sonnen. So you know, he's there with it. But, you know, I don't even know if it got to the ground. I mean, I don't even think, most people don't think it would have gone to the ground, but it could have. That would have been an interesting, intriguing prospect of that fight. But I don't know. They haven't, I think the UFC's really said anything about what they're going to do. Because it isn't like those scumfucks that are beating their wives. You know, this is more of a, you know, civil traffic matter. But it's still Nick Diaz, and he's been nothing but a headache. He's bitching about money, complaining about the company publicly. You know, just being Nick Diaz. You know, failed 2 drug tests for pot, of all fucking things. But I think Dana just really likes him. He's just one of those guys. You know, I mean, Dana likes, of course, he likes the money he brings in, because when he fights, it's a big deal. But I think Dana likes him just as a person, like, or a fighter. Like this, that's aura he brings as a fighter. It's a kind of scrappy fight thing that Dana really likes. I think that's why he puts up with his bullshit more than about anything else. Just had UFC 178. Awesome card. Couldn't really believe how good it was. You know, because this card looked like a disaster because everything fell out. You know, this was supposed to be Johnny Bones and Daniel Cormier. Originally it was going to be Gustafsson and Bones. Either way, it was going to be a great fight. And then Cormier and Bones had the big pull-apart brawl, and you know, all this cool stuff was going on. Like, I mean, everyone was hyped. Like, this was going to be $1 million+ buys pay-per-view. Bones gets injured, and the fight's pushed back. So now we have Mighty Mouse heading the card. Not a draw. He said exposure on Fox. I think that's why he got put on Fox. They're trying to help boost him, you know, as a name people want to see. But I don't know. He's just one of those guys. People are like, yeah, he's a really good fighter, and they just don't give a shit. I don't know if it's because he's so small, the 125er, or he just hasn't caught. Something's not catching. But him headlining the card meant nothing. You know, Conor McGregor fighting on the card was a bigger deal. Even some people think probably Kat Zingano, or even Chad Mendez, who was fighting on the damn prelims, which is kind of weird, but kind of made sense too. And he looked great. He looked like, you know, 3 years out, he looked like he missed a step. He destroyed the number 5 guy in the world. Conor McGregor lived up to his hype so far. It's another Chael Sonnen in the making. Big mouth, great cocky guy. If he can keep backing up his mouth, he's going to be a superstar if he's not already. Had a, Stoolgate. If you didn't hear about that, one of the fights, a guy got knocked silly. Almost, he would have been stopped in the fight if the round lasted 5 more seconds. Sorry, I'm not remembering his name. I'll put it up on the screen. And his corner just kind of pulled an old dirty boxing trick, and they were just trying to stall the in-between round timeout. It's like a minute went past, the minute break went past, and he was still on his stool. Should have, some people say they should have DQ'd him. I could swear Big John called an audible took a point away from him, but it was immaterial because he once he finally got him off the stool, he recovered and then knocked the other guy out. And it was like, so that's why everyone was pissed. You know, if he got up and got knocked out, no one would have cared. But he got up and won, so now everyone's up in arms and the stool gate and yada yada yada. And you know, you can't do anything at UFC. I mean, it's like, you know, commission should have done something. You know, Big John's in a tough spot there because it's like, you know, if he DQ'd them, you know, people would call bullshit. Not DQing them, they're calling bullshit. It's, I don't know what the right call is there. Definitely deducting a point. If he didn't deduct a point, he should have. Like, that should have been immediate. That's, you know, even if it's not on the fighter, it's on his corner, but he represents, the dude, he brought the corner in. If they're on him, their actions are on him. So, yeah, whatever. It'll pass. I don't give a shit about Stoolgate, honestly. It's like, just, you know, now that they've done it, now people will be more aware of it. Someone tries to pull it again, they'll be quicker to react, and they'll have a plan in place, hopefully. So, maybe they'll rematch him, and he can say, hey, I should have won that fight. But, I mean, dude, you did get your ass knocked out after you had him on the ropes, so I don't know. Anyway, that's MMA for now. Don't get into Bellator or anything else. Tito Ortiz, Stephan Bonner, gives a shit. Washed up old dudes in another organization. One I do care about, Chael Sonnen, probably, by the time this is up, they'll probably already aired. I'll go try to find it just to hear the commentary. Chael Sonnen and Jim Ross, voice of pro wrestling, calling an MMA fight. First time Jim's ever done it. I'd love to hear his take on it. I know he's a big fan, and I thought he was a good football caller. I'm not a big football or sports fan outside of MMA, but I did watch XFL, and I thought he was a great football announcer. He's a great play-by-play for any sport he follows. So I'd really love to hear him call MMA, and of course Chael right there with him as color. I think that's perfect. So I just want to hear that team. So I'll check that out, see how JR sounds calling something besides pro wrestling. Anyway, that's it for the MMA State of the World address, motherfucker. I am the Salty Seaman, and I'm out. Peace.